The next witness interview is Larry Warren.
Is that this is an event that involved numerous people, a series of events that involved highly trained observers.
Analysts look for the pronoun I at the beginning of a statement. Here, due to contamination, we do not see it for a few lines. Watching the video, we can see that this sentence isn't the start of the interview. We like to see the pronoun I as an indicator of linguistic commitment on the part of the subject. In itself, it isn't a determiner of veracity or deception. This, in statement analysis, this versus that, this indicating closeness and that indicating distance. The subject is linguistically connecting himself close to the event, even with the time span being a decade and a half. This is an event that involved numerous people. An event minimizes the event. It is a distancing indicator. A or an makes it one of many. If the subject had said this event or the event, it would bolster the significance of said event. Numerous people. The word numerous, the subject may be further distancing himself for the event. Many would mean a lot to most people. Numerous might mean 3 or 4 people. We do not know what the subject's meaning of numerous is, but we note that the subject uses a word that can mean many or few. Here you can see where I indicate both closeness and distancing. How can it be both? The event is his personal subjective linguistic reality, and it is close to him whether it is deceptive or not. We now note that he uses words which can be seen as distancing him, which may be indicators of deception. We continue to see how the subject's language unfolds to see if he can convince us the event is real to him, or whether he will continue to give indicators of distancing and or deception. An event becomes a series of events. In analysis, we look for changes of language. Here the subject changes the singular event into a series of events. Changes in language can be appropriate, and we look for reasons for the change. If we do not find a reason for the change, we often see deception. The major reason for a change in language is emotion. It might be his use of numerous that precipitates this change, as he is involved in 1 out of 3 nights of sightings. The subject paused. Pauses can indicate self-censoring or needing time to think. Experiential memory does not need self-censoring or time to think about what to say. It can also be completely innocent, as in mannerisms or lapses. We look for and note how often and where it occurs. Numerous people becomes highly trained observers. Here the change of language is people to observers. This comes after the pause. The subject has a need to upgrade people to observers. Beyond that, he added 2 qualifying words to observers, highly and trained. This is indicative of a need to persuade. Often we find need to persuade when the item cannot stand on its own in the linguistic reality of the speaker, which comes out in their language, and this need to persuade often indicates the opposite. It is also passive language, as the highly trained observers are not named, nor their function in the event.
Very well documented. There's more documentation on Bentwaters in the public realm than there is on Roswell. There's just a lot of alleged stories with Roswell and old retold tales. Not that I don't think there is any truth to Roswell, but I think this is a current contemporary event, only 15 years old this year.
The subject's use of qualifiers indicates sensitivity and a need to persuade. Here he uses 2 qualifying words to bolster documented, very and well. This leads us to ask why he needs to persuade. Is it because he has not been believed in the past, or is he lacking conviction in this event? The subject continues with his need to persuade by comparing Bentwaters to Roswell, as if more documentation gives more veracity. Sensitivity is noted. The subject, then after comparing the 2 events, he piles on by diminishing Roswell to mere stories, adding the word alleged, further negating status to Roswell. Yet we see this is not enough for the subject, and he reduces it further to old retold tales. This indicates the subject's emotional state as seen in the change of language. Diminishing Roswell does not elevate Bentwaters. Not that I don't think. The subject offers two negations, not and don't. Things spoken in the negative indicate sensitivity and are important to the speaker. When someone tells us what isn't, what didn't happen, what they didn't think, the analyst must note as high importance. The negation comes after he diminishes Roswell and he now appears to distance himself from what he just said, but refutes or minimizes by comparison what came before. The subject reaffirms to us feelings for Roswell. Feelings for Roswell are more in keeping with his earlier comments, and the negation indicates his concern about how he may appear denigrating Roswell. This has the effect of focusing on self, current contemporary, a need to persuade himself. To think is weak language. Time has no relevance to veracity.
The importance, first of all, to this country is that it happened on British soil. Your Ministry of Defence claims there is no defence significance to these events.
Yeah, I have a letter from them on it saying that.
Well, if it was of no defence significance and all that, we were a nuclear base. We are the largest weapons storage dump in NATO.
A pause followed by the word "the" repeated twice. This could indicate self-censoring or needing time to think. The brain processes language very quickly, and one doesn't need to stop and think about what pronoun or article to use, as they are intuitive. Therefore, when seen in a statement, it often indicates the subject is not using experiential memory or feels a need to gauge his words. When we see the use of numeric, we note that the speaker is using logical thinking. After first, we expect second and third, and so on. It may also be an attempt to focus the listener's attention by adding emphasis. If that is the case, then one would ask why the need. This appears to be ingratiating on the part of the subject to his British interviewer, a plea to show solidarity with the interviewer, something unexpected unless the subject has doubts about his account. We presuppose that the subject is telling the truth. We listen to the words and the language to guide us. We do not expect distancing language or unexpected language if the account is true. It is preceded with "your," which is distancing language from the speaker and attributing to the interviewer. Again, unexpected, sort of passive-aggressive on the part of the subject. We were a nuclear base. We were the largest weapons storage dump in NATO. The subject pauses between storage and dump. There may be sensitivity to his secrecy requirement regarding what was at the facility. The word dump may be a military slang used interchangeably with depot by those working on or around the facility.
Are you allowed to say that without compromising
Well, I'm
national
probably not.
security?
It is best to let the subject speak. Interruptions tend to reduce the free editing process. Here, the interruption may have caused the lack of second after the subject's first.
People aren't pleased that I'm saying it, I'm sure, but I do, because number one, my country has lied to yours for many years.
Passive voice. Passivity is used to hide identity and/or responsibility. It is also a weak statement which avoids an answer since the question was a yes or no. When the subject goes on beyond a yes or no, it indicates the question is sensitive to the subject. People aren't pleased. The subject's use of the word people and not the MOD or the military may indicate he is thinking about a specific person or persons, but refutes or minimizes by comparison what came before. The subject puts himself ahead of authority. But I do. The subject then goes on to justify himself. Because, number one, my country has lied to yours for many years. The subject goes back to logic with number one. We should expect this to be followed with number two, etc. If there is one, we must have two, three, etc. for his mind to bring the numeric up. It shows the subject likes order and structure. Has lied. The subject brings the element of time into his language. The law of economy states that people communicate using the shortest, clearest way to convey their ideas or thoughts. Extra or unnecessary words are only such to the listener. For the speaker to include, there is a reason, and these words therefore are important in analysis. The word has elongates time and is unnecessary to the sentence, as the sentence does not lose any meaning if it is not there. This sentence is sensitive to the speaker as he accuses my country of lying to yours. He takes possession of country and past tense over time for lying. He believes his words. Is this to ingratiate the interviewer? My country has lied to yours for many years. This is passive language with no specifics or why he has brought up the subject. It looks like an attempt to excuse himself from something, possibly something he has done, such as break a secrecy agreement he has with the military.
The Americans wouldn't like very much if England came over and put nuclear weapons in our backyard very much.
In the negative, plus the addition of the qualifying very much, which is repeated at the end of the sentence, shows heightened sensitivity to what the subject is saying. This and previous sentences are showing some level of unexpected emotion by the subject. Is the inclusion of the words America and England causing stress to the subject? There is also a change in language. Britain becomes England. The emotion by the subject could be a reason for the change. This sentence carries the subject's justification for his speaking about nuclear weapons after the interviewer questioned him, compromising national security. It appears the question has stressed the subject.
As Americans, we started to see that imposing our will on the rest of the world for whatever reasons. I mean, the Russians are gone. They're no threat anymore, apparently, right?
This is a convoluted sentence. We see the subject self-censor after as time has, because he changes tack and says something different than what he started to say. He again does not complete verbalizing his thought, as he again seems to self-censor and say something not congruent with the earlier part of the sentence. This is a weak sentence, noted by passivity and negation. No threat anymore. Added to the passivity, the subject asks, apparently, right? This is to look to the interviewer for support. This weakens the subject's claim. This sentence is still part of the subject's justification after the interviewer's question on compromising national security. It is probably not a secret at the time of the interview that there were nuclear weapons on the American base. We should consider that compromising national security might relate to something beyond the weapons dump. Could it be the UFO issue that is related to national security? Note, we did not get to a second or third point following numeric logic. The subject remains linguistically committed to his country even though he has denigrated his country. This is noted by his as Americans and our will. He may consider himself a whistleblower.
Were they ever a threat?
Were they ever a threat? I don't know. They were, when I was in the military, we were trained that they're the big bad guys. I'm not so sure.
Were they ever a threat? The subject repeats the question from the interviewer. This is similar to a pause, needing time to think, not having an answer. The statement about threat is bookended with the negative, showing sensitivity to his answer. The subject denigrates his country, implying the military may have been lying regarding a threat. This may account for his sensitivity.
So what happened at Bentwaters? And what?
I knew you were going to do that to me.
I knew you were going to do that tonight. Why does the subject have sensitivity to the question? This is unexpected. The subject is peddling a UFO story. I would expect he would welcome the question, not distance himself. That is another indicator of distancing besides the response to the question.
In a nutshell, we had 3 nights of UFO events in 1980. We had, on the first night, there were 3 security policemen, 2 security police, 1 law enforcement that was sent out into the woods.
Curious to see the word nutshell. Is this leakage and the word nut being in his mind? It, nutshell, could be a minimization, distancing of what happened. We had 3 nights. The subject links himself to the events with the pronoun we, while he was only involved on one night, the third night. This is unexpected. I would expect there were 3 nights of UFO events. The pronoun we may refer to Americans, and we could also mean the group of Americans involved in the event, the implication being a military operation. The subject repeats the pronoun we, uniting himself with the event even as he speaks of the first night, where he was not involved. The subject has 2 pauses, which could be self-censoring or needing time to formulate his words. It seems as if he is trying to remember a script, as he starts with the 3 security policemen and then corrects to 2 security police and 1 law enforcement, and uses the incorrect was instead of were. This would not have been experiential memory since he wasn't there on that evening, and that can appropriately account for the confusion in his retelling. There is passivity in the introduction of police and why they were sent. Out into the woods. The word out is incongruent and unnecessary to the sentence. Unnecessary words are important to the speaker, therefore analysts take note and attempt to understand the speaker's intent. There is a change in language from security policeman to police. This is appropriate after the introduction to use a shorthand name or term going forward. We take note if the shorter reverts back to the longer, as that could indicate a change in emotion or linguistic reality or relationship change of the speaker.
These are American.
To me, it is unexpected that the interviewer asks this question, but not what is the difference between security policemen and law enforcement.
American security police to investigate a series of lights in the forest. One of the 3 of the airmen were John Burroughs, Jim Peniston, and a guy named Cabanasac, his last name. I don't remember his first.
The subject goes back to the longer American security police as he reintroduces them, then goes on to give their names and why they went out into the forest. This is an expansion of his in a nutshell start. It shows a reluctance to discuss or a distancing on the part of the speaker. Several pauses and a change to what he started to say with what he ended up saying is indicative of sensitivity or stress.
They encountered an object. These men were missing for 4 hours. They were out of contact with the base. Contrary to what has been told in this country, they were abducted and missing and were put through a series of experiments. I've heard their regressive hypnosis tapes. These guys aren't happy this happened to them.
Starting in the negative, the subject makes reference to this country. Were other countries told something else? The language remains passive and no specifics. Storytelling. I've heard their regressive hypnosis tapes. This is a clean sentence and reliable, indicated by the pronoun I and lack of qualifiers. These guys aren't happy this happened to them. Still passive voice, as well as in the negative, telling us what they aren't. This indicates closeness to what these guys aren't happy with, and maybe leakage to reflect self. Is our subject not happy this happened to him?
The next night there were some other events. I have no idea to what degree, sightings at the very least.
The subject stays with passive language, as well as in the negative, I have no idea. Everyone has some idea. This is more distancing from events of day 2. Sightings at the very least. This is more minimizing the event, the very least.
The 3rd night was the big night. That involved the landing, or the appearance, of a craft on the ground, numerous sightings of different objects in the sky, firing beams of light down to the ground, harmless, apparently, but also...
Night is repeated. Repeated words indicate sensitivity. The 3rd night was the big night. The 3rd night was the only night the subject was involved in the event. Is this why the subject refers to it as the big night? We should expect to see a linguistic and personal commitment to the event with the pronoun I. This sentence is telling. We see no commitment to anyone seeing a landing. We may also be looking at deception with the correction or the appearance of a craft. These lines continue the passive voice, which is unexpected in a first-person account. Where we may have given a pass to the parts of the narrative when the subject was not present, these lines are unexpectedly weak. Numerous sightings of different objects in the sky. Note, the subject does not say there were numerous sightings. This is distancing and passive voice in the language of the subject. Again, this is not what is expected in a first-person account. Firing beams of light down to the ground, harmless apparently. Still with the passive voice, we are not told the objects were firing beams of light. Rather, we are left to make that conclusion. In statement analysis, we do not make the conclusions. We note the incomplete language and we ask questions. Harmless apparently. This is passive language. There is no explanation for how the subject concluded that the beams were harmless. But also, but is a comparative word. Unfortunately, the interviewer interrupted the subject, so we do not know what he was about to refute or minimize in his previous sentence.
Where do these beams of light go?
On the ground, but also on the ground and through our weapons storage area, the hardened earthen covered bomb storage facilities where we kept tactical nuclear weapons.
On the ground. This phrase is repeated, making it sensitive to the subject. It is also a bit incongruent as he states on the ground and then says but, which is a comparative word which refutes or minimizes by comparison what came before. It is incongruent because it repeats the same phrase on the ground, then expands to include the weapons storage area. Then to add to his sensitivity, he goes on to describe the storage area. This description goes beyond the law of economy in language, where the fewest words are used to convey the intended message, heightening the subject's sensitivity. Is it the nuclear weapons that brings out this reaction? The subject uses we to include himself as part of the American force deployed to this base. We indicates unity, which is unexpected as he has previously denigrated the US.
Did this affect the weapons in any way?
It probably did. Apparently it did. I don't know this firsthand, but it seems that there was an emergency there.
It probably did. Apparently it did. These are vague, passive and weak. Probably, apparently. The subject does not tell us how he knows this. The subject then tells us in the negative what he doesn't know. This answers our question as to why it is passive. He doesn't know. But it seems that there was an emergency there. But refutes or minimizes by comparison what came before. The word seems provides us with yet another point of passivity and weakness. Does the subject even believe his own words?
We had tactical teams flown in from Germany the next day to deal specifically with the nuclear ordnance and any potential damage they may have suffered during the course of these alleged events.
With the pronoun we, the subject claims unity with the American forces. The subject would have played no part, and his passivity indicates he has no knowledge or impact. This is a need to persuade and weakens his claims. Specifically, mentioned without explanation, followed by any potential, may, alleged events. 3 points of passivity and distancing which increase the weakness of the claims. May have suffered during the course of these alleged events. The course of is unnecessary language. It incorporates the element of time, it elongates, it is slowing the pace. Why is there a need to slow the pace? Deception? Why does the subject call them alleged events? Does he not believe his own words in his account?
Mr. Colonel Holt publicly states that the plane came in, but he doesn't know why it came in.
The subject pauses, possible point of self-censoring or need to formulate his words, then introduces Colonel Holt with an incomplete social introduction. Also noted is he starts by calling him Mr. before changing to Colonel. The pause and change might be an indication of stress at the mention of Colonel Holt. The subject indicates sensitivity with the word publicly, which is unnecessary, and then but doesn't know why in the negative.
Well, as the commander of an Air Force base, you don't let anyone just land on your base and not know why. The reason he can't say why they were there is because he still can't admit we had nuclear weapons, because he is more held under the National Security Act of 47 than I am, or than I allow myself to be.
The subject appears to subtly diminish the colonel. Here in these lines and in the introduction of the colonel, the subject indicates contempt for him. So far, the subject has distanced himself and diminished the other characters and their experiences while building up himself and his experiences. Well, this is similar to a pause and gives the subject time to formulate his words. We see more use of the negative as the subject explains events about Colonel Holt. He also speaks for him, which is unexpected. The subject explains why things didn't happen or weren't done, which is a strong indicator of sensitivity by the word because. We expect the subject to tell us what happened and what they experienced, not why other people did or did not do, or say or did not say.
So what sort of stockpile of weapons are we dealing with?
We're dealing with tactical nuclear, we were dealing with tactical nuclear weapons for use in battlefield situations, low yield, but with the amount that we had, if there had been a chain reaction between our two bases.
Dealing with tactical nuclear. The subject repeats this phrase twice, back to back, making the issue of nuclear weapons highly sensitive. Did he have a secrecy agreement that he is breaking? We're dealing, and our two bases. The subject continues to add himself in the collective we. This is the subject making a claim that has no basis in reality. Nuclear weapons are not at risk of a chain reaction by means of proximity to each other. If they did, anyone standing near a nuclear weapon would receive a lethal level of radiation. The continued use of we shows a need to be included in the group, possibly to align himself with the authority of the group, whether the military or the US government at large.
We had the largest weapons storage area in the whole of NATO on RAF Woodbridge. There would have been an obvious disaster.
We, the subject follows his pattern of using the pronoun we to garner unity, the royal we. It has the appearance of bragging and possibly connecting himself to the greater authority of the group. The pauses in this sentence highlight the sensitivity we have seen previously when the subject is talking about weapons. Is he still under a security gag order?
I mean, it would have been the worst thing ever.
I indicates linguistic commitment. I mean, this is his personal opinion and he needs to validate it with the personal pronoun. It carries on his need to persuade. Would have been the worst thing ever. After his commitment and need to persuade, the subject diminishes his claim with hyperbole, worst thing ever.
And so for the Ministry of Defense to make any comment, at least they do, my government still denies anything happened, even when you force the issue and show them evidence. Oh, well, then they'll make up some other excuse and lie. But
pause. The subject pauses several times in these few lines, more than his normal, making the topic sensitive. Force, evidence, excuse, lie. The subject employs passive voice in these lines. Any comment, the issue, show them evidence, make some excuse, and lie. The subject provides no specifics.
What evidence is there that anything actually happened there?
Evidence. The evidence is as varied as anything one would expect to see in a court of law. Quality witness testimony and affidavits and statements. An actual audio tape made on site, at the very least, is
Evidence. The subject repeats the interviewer's word. This functions as a pause or a question. He then repeats evidence, the evidence. This indicates the question is sensitive to him. This line is in the passive voice. Passivity is used to conceal responsibility or identity. He invokes court of law. Is the subject attempting to grant himself legitimacy worthy of a court of law? Can his evidence not stand on its own? Quality witness testimony. Why does the subject need to add the qualifier quality to witness testimony? An actual and at the very least are two qualifying and unnecessary phrases, adding to the weakness and sensitivity we have seen earlier from the subject.
That's the halt tape.
The halt tape, which is authentic, folks, and was made on site. The reason there's an echo in it, apparently people think here it was made in a room. The reason why is that from the actual tape it was transferred onto another tape by holding one tape recorder next to another in a room, so you're getting that echo.
The addition of the words folks is possibly an attempt to bring the audience into his confidence, ingratiation. The word which brings the focus back on itself. The tape is incongruent. The expected would be a short, simple line. The halt tape is authentic. Further weakening his claim, the subject adds, and was made on site. Location doesn't add veracity. The unnecessary words are only unnecessary to the listener. They have importance to the speaker. The speaker shows a need to persuade. Here the subject is telling us why instead of what he knows and saw. In his previous sentence, the subject shows his need to persuade and his sensitivity to the tape. He now gives us more reason for concern with his need to explain people here. This is passive voice, as the people are not identified, but their location is here. The subject adds the unnecessary qualifier actual as a need to persuade. The need to persuade is often a product of the subject's knowledge that their claim is weak and needs help to be believable.
No one I know has the first generation except Mr. Halt, probably. And that's the very least, where if you look at that tape, which is 18 minutes of 4 hours, still it's very significant.
No one is repeated, adding sensitivity to the topic of the original tape. We can see that the subject doesn't even refer to it as the original and uses the unexpected term first generation, which implies the possibility there are different versions. To further add to the doubt and weakness to his narrative, he ends with probably. Staying with the passivity, the subject stumbles, stutters and pauses while continuing with his need to persuade to bolster his claims which he still hasn't clarified. This is an important point. We expect people who were present at an extraordinary event to speak clearly with commitment to what they saw and experienced. Pages in, we still haven't heard his account. Unexpected, if you look at. The subject refers visually to an audio tape. This is distancing. It appears to weaken the tape. The subject then makes it appear even weaker by saying that only 18 minutes are in the public domain. 18 minutes of 4 hours. The sensitivity to the tape is unexpected. Why does the subject have a need to explain the tape?
You're having senior people in the United States Air Force dumbstruck at what they're saying.
You're having. The subject uses the pronoun you to bring the familiarity or universality to the account. In a truthful account, one would not expect the pronoun you. The expectation would be for a definitive there are. The subject continues with passive voice, senior people. This is weak and distancing. No names are given. At what they're seeing. The subject refers in visual terms about an audio tape for a second time. This is unexpected language. One hears an audio tape, not see it. Unexpected language is important in understanding the speaker. Is he being deceptive?
You have the Halt document, which is the Unexplained Lights memo that was released in my country from your Ministry of Defense, though they denied it existed up to that point. That was released because of information I provided that led to a free FOIA request, and after 5 denials, it was released by your country, not mine.
You have. Again, the subject prefers using the pronoun you. Is this to bring the audience into the account as support in a need to persuade? As stated, it is an unexpected term. The subject again brings in a reference to the Ministry of Defence. Is this to bolster the veracity of his account in a need to persuade? That was released because of information I provided. This is a reliable statement, yet it is still a point of weakness as the language surrounding it is passive and gives us no information about any of the events.
We have soil analysis from some of the landing sites that...
We see a change from the previous 2 claims of supporting information. The subject changes from the pronoun you to the pronoun we. Why? Is this because the soil analysis is not in the public domain? The use of the pronoun we to include the speaker with the US military and government as a whole is disingenuous. The royal we, the subject has used it many times, and it is not expected in the context.
How many landing sites were there?
At least 3. The main one is on a farmer's field called Capel Green, where most of our work is focused. This is where this soil analysis that has been done, it's been done 3 times. It will be done again while we're here.
At least 3. Again, the expected language is missing. We expect clarity from an eyewitness. He could have said, 3 that I know of. That would strengthen his claim. The subject continues in passive voice. The subject continues with our work without identifying who our includes. The subject self-censors or pauses several times in one sentence, indicating sensitivity. The sentence is muddled as though he is self-censoring in context to telling about the soil analysis. The use of the past perfect continuous that had been done shows the pace and elongates time. Then the subject reports that it has been done 3 times and finally says it will be done again. This is a very sensitive issue for the speaker. 3 landing sites, 3 soil samples. 3 is often referred to as the liar's number. When asked how many, a deceptive person often chooses 3, as 2 is too few and 4 too many. While the subject may or may not be deceptive regarding the number 3 is noted as a possible deception.
So the soil is still contaminated 15 years later?
The soil is affected, and quite a bit so affected.
Here the subject could have easily parroted the word of the interviewer, contaminated, yet the subject introduces the unexpected word, affected, and even repeats it at the end of the sentence. The word affected is to obscure or hide the truth. It is a passive and weak word. It shows the subject unwilling to even parrot back the word contaminated, which would have a greater reference to the soil condition without commitment.
What sort of event happened at that place?
At that place, an object appeared on the ground in the place of a mist. I saw this happen.
At that place, that versus this, that being distance and this being close. This is the highlight of Larry Warren's account, yet his language is that of distance, that place. The distancing could be in part the repeating of interviews. The linguistic commitment is lacking for an event that is consuming much of his time. As we get near the end, the subject brings us to his unique experience. We look for commitment without qualifiers or sensitivity or passivity. Here we have passivity, an object, in the place of a mist. There is no description of the object and no mention of mist beforehand. This is vague and unremarkable and not what is expected. I saw this happen. Finally, we have the pronoun I, linguistic commitment. But to what? An undescribed object in a mist.
A red light moved in, exploded. It caused retina and eye damage to a lot of us peripheral people.
This subject remains elusive, continuing to use passivity. He doesn't commit himself linguistically with use of personal pronouns. Who saw the red lights? Who are a lot of us? Who are peripheral people? This is an unexpected manner to speak in for a first-hand event. It is more like reading a script than experiential memory. Expected would be I saw or I watched. It caused retina and eye damage to a lot of us. The subject claims to have witnessed this event, yet he does not use the pronoun I and maintains himself in a crowd with the pronoun us. Deceptive people do not like to be alone in their deception, so they often use the plural pronouns and avoid the personal pronoun I.
A structured object was in its place on the ground. Though you couldn't look directly at it, you'd have to look at it with your peripheral vision to get the shape.
This line is incongruent or out of sequence. The subject had already told us, an object appeared on the ground in the place of a mist. Then he tells us a red light moved in, exploded. Now he has a structured object was in its place on the ground. What happened to the object that appeared on the ground in the place of a mist? Is the subject confused? Did he mix up his narrative? Is he being deceptive? When the language is incongruent or out of sequence, the reason is often deception. This has the elements of passivity and distancing. The subject tells us what you couldn't do. Language in the negative is an indicator of high sensitivity. The subject also uses the third person you, which is unexpected in a first person account. This is distancing. The expected is the pronoun I, as this is supposed to be a rare event the subject was witness to. The subject should be telling us what he saw, what he heard, what he did, and not use the pronoun you when describing events. You'd have to look at it with your peripheral vision to get the shape. This is the second use of the word peripheral. The first was in reference to some of the a lot of us, peripheral people. The second is in reference to vision. The first reference is strange, peripheral people, like extras on a movie set. It is a strange reference and a possible self-reference from his writing a book. In statement analysis, repeated words have added importance and are indicators of sensitivity. To get the shape. This is passivity. What shape?
Entities were seen.
The subject pauses before and after saying, entities were seen. Again, the subject remains in the passive voice. What does he mean by the word entities? No pronoun accompanies this sentence. Who saw the entities?
How many?
3. Looking very translucent, not your what they call gray, all that sort of thing. It was almost ghost-like. Very much animated, self-animated though. That whole event was filmed and photographed.
3. The continued use of 3 to describe quantity is curious. 3 is sometimes called the liar's number. Here we see qualifiers, passivity in language, and using negation tells us what they were not. His life-defining moment and no commitment to his accounting of his own experience. These are indicators of deception. There are a number of pauses or points where the subject appears to self-censor. He begins to say aliens but doesn't complete the word. His need to avoid a direct commitment for or against the thing that he won't linguistically connect himself to is noted. When people are deceptive, they weave a picture and hope we will fill in the missing blanks. In analysis, the analyst doesn't interpret the subject's intentions. If he cannot describe them as aliens or living creatures, the analyst won't either. That whole event was filmed and photographed. Why did the interviewer interrupt? And why didn't the interviewer follow up on the issue of photographs and video?
Out of the craft?
They didn't,
They
well,
used to
no,
appear?
they
What
were
craft?
floating about a foot above the ground in a very bright light. The lower extremities were very hard to see. They were a foot off the ground.
The subject repeats they twice, resembling a stutter or pause. Then he does pause. This is indication of self-censoring or needing time to think about what to say. People who are not deceptive and are speaking from experiential memory do not need to pause or self-censor. Again, the subject does not give details or specific descriptions. Everything is left vague and passive. Passivity is used to hide identity and or responsibility, or possibly in this case, to hide truth. About a foot above the ground, and they were a foot off the ground. The subject repeats the line showing heightened sensitivity. There is also a change in the language from above the ground to off the ground. Where we see changes of language, we look for a reason why. If we cannot see a reason why, we often note deception. The subject adds the qualifier very to very bright light and were very hard to see. This is a need to persuade and an indication that the account cannot stand on its own, so the subject attempts to bolster his account. This can also be seen as distancing language. It allows the subject an excuse from being asked details, as there was a very bright light and it was difficult to see.
Did anybody meet them?
Well, people saw them, and our wing commander was very close at one point.
Well is a verbalized pause. It gives the speaker a chance to think about what he will say. Well, people saw them. The use of passivity is unexpected unless he doesn't know who saw them. Didn't the subject say he saw the entities? And our wing commander was very close at one point. Why does the subject distance himself and put the wing commander into this dialogue at this point where he was describing his own account? Does he need to bring in a higher status rank to validate his account? Note that while he brings in the wing commander, he does not say the wing commander saw the entities.
But I can't say there was contact, and I've been misquoted an awful lot on this. Is that for the things that did not happen is that we did not repair any craft.
Sensitivity is highlighted by pauses and self-censoring, as well as using the negative to tell us what he can't say. That did not happen, and what we did not repair. We expect a person who is speaking from experiential memory to tell us what they did, what they saw, and what they experienced. When the speaker doesn't do this, we look for deception. And I've been misquoted. An awful lot on this is that for the things the subject brings up being misquoted on his own without prompting. So it is an important issue for him. It goes outside his account of what happened on the night in question. It is unexpected, and the unexpected is important to the analyst.
Years ago I was asked this, and in America we have home box office. Yeah. They did a documentary, and they took an interview I did with the BBC and chopped it up to make it sound like I was saying what didn't happen did happen.
The narrative continues with passivity. The pronoun I makes a rare appearance. This, which isn't clear what this refers to, is close to the speaker. This equals close, that equals distance. Still with passivity, they plus they repeated, making it very sensitive to the speaker. Passivity is used to hide identity and/or responsibility. The pronoun I, which indicates linguistic commitment, is used 3 times in these 2 sentences, where it has been largely and unexpectedly absent for most of this interview. Yet his linguistic commitment is to dispute an earlier interview he did where he told, by his own words, what didn't happen.
That's why you can't win in this stuff.
That's why that indicates distance. This indicates closeness. Here the subject uses both in this short sentence. That for why you can't win, and this with stuff. Win is distant and stuff is close. You can't win. To win is in the negative. Things in the negative are of heightened importance to the speaker. The subject has compared or spoken of other people involved more than he speaks of his own experiences. Is this why you can't win enters his language? Does he see this as a competition with others who had involvement?
First of all, is that there was no crash of anything. Second of all, we didn't help repair any spaceship. I don't know for a fact this was a spaceship, you know. Then, also they said that the wing commander shook hands with these aliens. I mean, it's absolute ludicrous. It's not true. There was observation.
First of all, when a person uses first, we are looking at a logical linguistic view of the reality of the speaker and should expect a second and third, etc. First may be in order of occurrence, or first could indicate priority. The subject followed first with of all. This appears to make it a priority to the speaker. The subject needs to say there was no crash of anything. Anything is all-encompassing. The interviewer did not ask if anything crashed, so why is it first of all to the speaker? Second of all. Second priority. We didn't repair any spaceship. Again, the subject answers a question that wasn't asked, and to add even more sensitivity to the issue, the subject states it in the negative, telling us what wasn't done. We expect to hear what was done, what did happen. The speaker continues in the negative in context of fact, plus this showing closeness. He is the eyewitness, but clearly stating he saw a spaceship is not possible for him. The subject stumbles through these lines. There are pauses and stuttering, indicating sensitivity and tension on the part of the speaker in context of the aliens. And that's absolutely ludicrous. It's not true. The subject calls the claim not only ludicrous by adding the unnecessary qualifier absolutely, weakening the claim by need of persuasion. He then stutters to say, it's not true. Another point of sensitivity.
So there was not a meeting of top military.
I don't know. I've always felt there could have been communication of some sort, maybe telepathically, if this was a real event. I feel it was a real event, not a projection or a holographic test of troops' reactions and all that. There's so many theories. But I think it was just that, a non-terrestrial event.
I don't know is a clear answer. If the subject left it at that, he doesn't. What follows is speculation and emotion. I've always felt there could have been communication of some sort. Felt is an emotional and weak response, and the weakness is confirmed by the additional words could have been. Then, to take the weakness still further, the subject adds, if this was a real event, thus allowing his own words to negate what he said. If he does not believe his own words, why should his audience? The subject continues emotionally with, I feel it was a real event. By feeling, he leaves it open for others to feel differently. His experiences should be stated clearly. When the speaker needs to use emotions, feeling, one must ask if deception is at play. And all that. This is passivity. Passivity is used to conceal identity and/or responsibility. But is used to refute or minimize by comparison of what comes before. Here he refutes or minimizes the many theories. He then weakens this minimization by saying, I think, which allows others to think otherwise. He goes on to further weaken his claim, adding just that. Just being a comparative word, which means that the subject was thinking of at least one other thing in context of a real event. Even the words non-terrestrial are passive and may be an avoidance of lying directly by pausing the words to be interpreted by the audience.
So how many people were there?
On that night,
This is the last night.
this is the last big night. It was roughly 85 or so. There were two British bobbies from the town of Woodbridge.
This is the last big night. The subject repeats the question to the interviewer. Both the question and answer are in the unexpected present tense. Or roughly, 85 or so. The subject says, possibly as a way of inclusion and familiarity with the interviewer, possibly as stating the obvious as a need to persuade. Out of 85 people, the subject mentions two British bobbies from the town of Woodbridge. Why? Does he look for support in mentioning the British police? Does he need support?
Years ago I was misquoted, because I said there were 200 people working that night that were all aware these events were happening. Thus it became there were 200 people there. We didn't have 200 security police working that night.
Years ago I was misquoted. With the element of time, years ago, we see the subject's sensitivity to being misquoted. I was misquoted conveys the intent of the sentence. Anything added is unnecessary language. Is this to distance himself from previous statements? The subject shows commitment to these lines with his use of the personal pronoun I, which is curiously missing in describing the craft and the entities. And what is the commitment to? The commitment is to telling us that he was misquoted. 200 people becomes 200 security police in a change of language. When a change of language is encountered without a reason for the change, deception is often indicated.
There were English civilians that witnessed these events. We've interviewed many of them. Different elements of these events.
The subject uses passive language. He doesn't say who he interviewed or even described the events clearly.
We and what are you saying on this?
We, as my co-author, Peter Robbins, we have the first book from a first-hand witness, that being me, due out in '96, called Left at East Gate, a first-hand account of the Bentwaters-Woodbridge UFO incidents, its cover-up and investigation.
The question seems to elicit some pauses and stuttering on the pronoun my, followed by a complete social introduction indicating a good relationship with his co-author at the time of speaking. Somewhat unexpected to me that he defers from using the pronoun I. Does he not want to be alone in this? A first-hand witness, that being me. It is possible he wishes to distance himself from his account. Conclusion. The subject, Larry Warren, indicates deception of what occurred. There is clearly a lot of sensitivity, qualifiers, distancing language and passive language in this statement. There is hardly a sentence that is straightforward with expected language. This indicates he was on the periphery of events and not likely privy to much of the information such as Colonel Holt would have been. The subject does not clearly define what he saw and what he experienced. He distances himself from the events with sensitivity, qualifiers, and language in the negative. The subject doesn't use the personal pronoun I to connect and commit himself to his own personal experiences. The subject spends much of the interview diminishing others who were involved in the same event or on previous nights. It is in this context that the subject does use the personal pronoun I, indicating commitment to his negative view of the others and their experience. The subject gives us many linguistic indicators that he does not believe his own account.